small-scale crimes during this time and were slowly working their way up to what they would become. That side hustle of Larry's was real estate scams. He became a real estate agent and started doing all of these backdoor schemes in order to steal money from clients. He also shoplifted a $400 suit for funsies, I guess. So before his first big arrest, he had already stacked up a history of white-collar crime. There are several other crimes, because remember, LA was getting robbed a lot, that are believed to have been perpetrated by the two men, although it can't be confirmed. Unofficially, they are associated with 2 armored car robberies and 3 bank robberies. I mean, it's, not hard to see why. If all these were really them, then their first official hit was on an armored car on July the 20th of 1993. That incident went off mostly without a hitch. That was until October the 29th of that same year. The 2 of them were pulled over for speeding, and whenever the officer walked up to the window and began asking them basic questions, like where's your driver's license and insurance, they started to get nervous. Or at the very least, Emil did. See, at this point, they were using so many fake IDs and names for when it came to vehicles they were renting, or properties that Larry was trying to scam someone on, and false business practices, that it was pretty easy to get their stories mixed up, which it seems Emil did. When they were asked, is this your car, they were supposed to say that they had rented it from the airport because the car was rented from the airport. Instead, Emil panicked and said it's Dennis's mom's. Dennis was the alias that Larry was using at the time. So the cop was suspicious, he ran numbers on the car and saw that the story doesn't make sense, so he eventually arrested them and searched the car. In the rental car, they found 2 rifles, 2 handguns, 3,000 rounds of ammunition, police radio scanners, smoke bombs, IEDs, body armor, and 3 fake license plates. I almost have to give them credit for having the gall to drive around downtown LA in a rented vehicle with a small armory in the trunk. The 2 were charged with conspiracy to commit robbery. Duh, because after they ran their names and prints, they saw they were using fake aliases and had a record, and I'm sure those IEDs weren't medicinal. They were each given short jail sentences and 3 years probation. The most important part of this is that they were each given felony charges and had all their guns confiscated. Over the next few years, again, this is assuming that they did rob all of the places it's assumed that they robbed, they would hit another armored car in June of 1995, this time killing one of the guards aboard the armored car, and then torching the vehicle that they had drove in order to get rid of evidence. I guess they like heat. And then in 96, robbed 2 Bank of America locations. If they did do these hits, then they had stolen at this point about $1.5 million. The pair, only known for their ski mask and AKs, were dubbed the High Incident Bandits. There we go with the cool names again. At this point, again assuming the previous robberies were them, they got this method down to a science. They would go in loud, shooting rounds into the ceiling in order to freak everybody out. One of them would get the crowd to lay down and not look at their faces, so there was no risk of them being identified, while the other would go to the back door, shoot the door open to the teller's area, and have the bank manager take them to the vault where they would load cash into bags and then leave. Several of these heists took place in under 3 minutes, and given that the average police response time in the area was 8 minutes, the business was doing pretty good. However, as we're going to find out, for each of these heists, they brought an absurd amount of ammunition with them just in case something went down. They had planned for their next hit to be at another Bank of America location, this time the one at 6600 Laurel Canyon Boulevard. This was the largest Bank of America location in North Hollywood, so they assumed it would have the largest takeaway. This location had a parking lot to the north and south, with a neighborhood bordering it on the east and a shopping mall bordering it to the west. While this did mean there was a higher chance to be seen as it was a high traffic area, it also meant that there were several escape routes. And in order to maintain fire superiority, the pair would bring with them 3 Norinco Type 56 rifles, or in other words, Chinese AK-47s, a Bushmaster XM15 dissipator, which is essentially a Sporter M16 with a shortened barrel, an HK-91 or civilian G3, and a Beretta 92 FS. The guns will come into more detail as things start to go wrong, trust me. The pair also heavily laid up in body armor. each wearing bulletproof material for a soft vest before inserting metal trauma plates underneath those vests. Phillips went a step farther by wearing what's called a groin guard, or essentially a bulletproof diaper, as well as taking pieces of Kevlar and duct taping it to his arms and legs. All of the weapons that they brought were not only illegally obtained, because if you'll remember they were both felons, but they were also illegally modified, save for the Beretta and the HK-91. If anything were to go down, the men would essentially become walking juggernauts, and as we're going to see, that's exactly what happened. Each of the men wore gloves in order to hide their fingerprints, so the gloves had sewn-in watch faces so that they could time the robbery itself. So, on February the 28th of 1997, the two men pulled into the north parking lot at 9:16 a.m. To calm their nerves, the two downed phenobarbital before they walked in. Phenobarbital is typically an anti-seizure medication, but for what they were using it for, it was a very intense nerve suppressor. The two set their timers for 8 minutes and then exited the 1987 Chevy Celebrity. Completely kitted out, the two made their way to the sidewalk and then began to walk into the Bank of America. And that 8-minute timer probably would have been okay if it wasn't for a patrol car that just so happened to be driving by at the same time. The patrol car saw the two guys in ski masks, bulletproof armor with rifles walking into the building and figured it was a problem. Walking into the front door, there was a man using the ATM who Larry grabbed, threw on the floor, yelled, "This is a holdup," and began shooting into the ceiling. Larry kept shooting and telling everyone to get down, while Emil ran to the teller door, shot the lock off, and then grabbed the assistant manager. As soon as the two had walked in, the teller hit the panic button, although that didn't really matter because again the patrol car already saw them, and Emil made his way with the assistant manager to the vault to start loading the bags with money. Now, as mentioned earlier, a lot of these robberies only took a couple minutes. However, due to the recent string of robberies, a couple probably committed by Larry and Emil, the banks had changed procedure. So now, instead of just opening one key and all the money was there for the taking, money was composed into these small individual lockboxes. Because of that, it took way longer to load the bags with money than it had previously. On top of that, the pair had planned to hit the bank this Friday morning because there was supposed to be a money delivery a few hours earlier. However, again, because of the string of bank robberies, deliveries were purposefully sporadic. So Emil kept yelling at the assistant manager to give him the rest of the money because he thought there was more even though there wasn't none, and what there was no longer get hold of. This would cause the two to eat up the entirety of their 8 minutes. Larry was again out in the lobby on crowd control. However, for some reason, 3 minutes after this all began, he walked outside to the front door of the bank. To me, this indicates that he probably saw the patrol car see them as they were walking inside, because I don't know why else he would do this. He walks out the front doors and then just standing there, ski mask and AK to his side, looks down the street one direction and down the street to the other direction and then just walks back in. It's believed that whenever he looked south, he could probably see the cop car, which was the initial cop car that called for backup. So what probably happened, in my opinion, is he saw the cop car and then thought this is probably going to be bad. So then he's on crowd control, he gets everyone to lay down. He then walks back outside to check, sees the cop car and thinks, yeah, it's going to get bad. After he comes back inside, he goes to the security guard who is laying on the ground with everyone else before putting a gun to the back of his head and saying, "Whenever I tell you to, move everyone into the vault." Larry then says something to Emil, most likely informing him that there's police outside and it's about to be a fight. So Emil zips up the bag he's been filling, which contains $303,305, as well as 3 dye packs. Dye packs, for those that don't know, are these little packets of dye that are made to explode if something's stolen or taken away, so that it becomes unusable and traceable for whoever stole it. I'm sure Emil wasn't aware of this, and after a short discussion with Phillips, they changed their game. While all of this is happening inside, on the outside, police are taking up defensive positions around the front door of the bank. I also want to mention really quickly, I looked at so many different interviews and documentaries and websites in preparation for this, and this always happens with stories or cases I read about, that some information's wrong, but like entire documentaries had no idea what they were talking about. Like the majority of them conflicted with the footage that is clearly visible and just said that the pair did things that they did not do. One of the documentaries said that the two split up at one point and Emil walked out of a door that doesn't actually exist. One of them claimed that Emil was so intoxicated on the barbiturates that he passed out at one point, which he did not. And one of them claimed that Larry tried to kill Emil. No. It was too dumb not to mention. I had to get that off my chest. Especially before this whole situation goes from bad to worse, which it's about to right now. So the first wave of officers has now made their positions in front of the bank, and Emil is currently trying to bust open the ATMs in order to get some more money. So Larry steps out of the bank, now seeing more police cars lined up in front of him, and just starts shooting. Again, his AK had been illegally converted, so it was just full auto fire in the middle of a busy street in LA at 9 in the morning. See, for those that don't know, police were not allowed to carry rifles in their cruiser during this time. Because of that, nearly every officer at the scene only had a Beretta M92 or a Smith & Wesson revolver, meaning the largest caliber that the police had on hand was this, a 9mm bullet. For a comparison, one of the guns that Larry used was an HK-91 chambered in .308, which, if this is a 9mm, this is what they were carrying. Now normally up close it doesn't matter, a bullet's a bullet. However, this gunfight took place from several hundred feet away, and Larry and Emil were decked out in body armor. Meaning even if a police officer managed to hit an insane shot from 200 feet away with a handgun, the armor would catch the round. And meanwhile, Larry and Emil were able to pierce through the doors of police cars. So for the first 4 minutes, Larry's just standing outside, shooting a lot, and then reloading, and then shooting again without really worrying about cover. And the police on the receiving end were essentially pinned down and taking on casualties. Several officers and civilians were receiving gunshots to the legs and arms. The police began retrieving shotguns from their vehicles, but again, at the distance, they didn't do much, and what they did do, the armor stopped. One officer who was wounded stumbled into a dentist office that was located in the West Strip Mall, and as he stumbled into the door bleeding, the dentist began to patch him up as his partner stood inside and watched the door with a shotgun. After 4 minutes of this, Larry steps back into the doorway of the bank and Emil comes out to join him. The police during this time are trying to take pot shots at the